We are live. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's fight night. No, I'm sure it's going to be very civilized. Of course, this is the big debate of the evening. There's apparently something else going on in the BBC. I wouldn't bother with it. This is where the action is. We are not only a sellout crowd here at the UnHerd Club, but if you're watching online, either on Twitter or on YouTube, welcome to you as well. And I think we're going to get quite a big audience this evening. Basically, the way it's going to work is this. I'm going to quickly introduce our amazing all-star panel, representing, which I'm going to start with you, Rod. Representing the SDP is the famous journalist, Rod Liddle. He is also actually a candidate for that party, so he's slightly broken our rule of having no actual politicians, but we figure he is famous as a non-politician, so he still passes that test. Florence is our very own, she's my co-interviewer, in fact, on the UnHerd YouTube channel. I should emphasize that she is not speaking for the organisation this evening. She will be representing the Green Party, or she will be making a case for why we should be voting Green. Matt Goodwin, Professor Matt Goodwin, you will know, also a contributor to UnHerd, is an expert on populism. He's a pollster. He has a very popular Substack named after Matt Goodwin, I believe it's called Matt Goodwin.
Matt Goodwin Substack.
And he will be explaining to us why he thinks voting reform is the correct thing to do on this occasion. Peter Hitchens, I'm standing in your light.
You are, but you can keep standing in it.
Not that much introduction. He is, of course, an author, a broadcaster, a journalist, a thinker, and he is, quite interestingly for this conversation, someone who doesn't have a great deal of love for the Conservative Party, in fact wishes for their destruction, but is going to make paradoxically the case that we should still put our X next to the Tories. And last but not least, indeed very much not last, as most likely to be representing the winning side, let's just speak that sort of slightly obvious fact, is Rowenna Davis, a wonderful, highly thoughtful, erstwhile politician. I suppose you are actually a local councillor still, so you technically are a politician, not running in this election, but also a journalist and someone that we have long admired. So welcome, Rowenna Davis. You will notice that we don't have a Liberal Democrat on the panel. This is not a deliberate conspiracy. We tried really hard to find a suitable Liberal Democrat, and there were none. I put messages out on Twitter saying, are you a clever, funny, famous person who wants to come and represent the Liberal Democrats? We did not find any. So I was going to have a chair to officially empty chair them, but we don't have room on our stage, so that's the reason why we don't have the Lib Dems here. Without further ado, this is how it's going to work. We're going to have 5-minute max speeches, and I'm going to be a complete Nazi about this. I will shout 30 seconds before, and then I'm just going to just nudge people off the lectern if they're not observing our time limit. We're going to go down the line. Then they're going to have a 3-minute max reaction moment, where either I will throw questions at them or they will be able to respond to each other. That's then going to be the end of the formal proceedings. We're going to take a 10-minute break where you can go to the loo or you can get a drink, or if you're watching online, you can go and have dinner or do whatever you need to do, and then we're going to be back for questions. So we'll take questions in the room, and we'll also take questions from the online audience. And important to say, if you're watching online, please leave your questions in the first half, because what we'll do is we'll select them during the first half, and then I'll get them printed out and I can choose them, and we'll represent you in the room in the second half. So the order we will do this in is according to the most recent poll, and that means that Rowenna Davis, representing Labour, goes first. Thanks, Rowenna.
Cheers.
Oh. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much. So, friends told me that speaking in this debate was a bit like walking into the lion's den, but I always preferred debating lions than sheep anyway, so it's lovely to be here, and I'm really grateful for the chance to talk to you. The only thing I will say, Freddie, is I don't take orders from Nazis, so just be respectful with me, please. It's true. It's fair. I hope this is coming off my time. So tonight I wanted to take you to Croydon South, where I've been spending most of my election. It's where I live, and there's a 12,000 Conservative majority there. It has never, ever been Labour. And when you canvass there, it's got rolling green hills, and you need to often hike up to the front doors. And for 14 years, the people in that constituency, as they have been up and down the country, have been struggling and fighting to make ends meet. They have been working hard, abiding by the rules, caring for their family, and gave huge sacrifices through COVID. And whilst they struggled, their Conservative government, who should have been helping them, presided over chaotic, narcissistic, divisive, and incompetent mess. 5 prime ministers, 7 chancellors in 10 years, disgustingly wasteful contracts on PPE, Partygate, and of course, most recently, the betting scandal. Those voters in Croydon South do not forgive, and they don't forget. I remember last week I met a single mum on the doorstep. She's really trying to hold down a job and looking after a disabled son, and her mortgage was up for renewal just after Liz Truss announced her budget. And to this day, she is spending hundreds of pounds more a month on her mortgage, completely unnecessarily. That mum has voted Conservative her whole life. She will now be voting Labour. However, although everyone agrees on the doors it's time for change, not everyone is convinced that Labour is the one to bring it. So I thought I'd share with you what I often share with people on the doorstep. First, we try and listen rather than preach. We ask, what matters to you? What do you care about? And they talk to us about the cost of living, about public services, about crime and immigration. And I get to point at the leaflet and go, look, that's right, those things are all here. You know, we absolutely are going to be doing that. Like, our first step as a priority is to get economic stability. We want to set up Great British Energy to cut your bills. We want to reduce NHS waiting lists by imposing or getting rid of the tax breaks on non-doms. We want to create a strong new border force, bring in 6,500 new teachers, tackle antisocial behaviour. And I'm sure we're going to get into a lot more policy detail tonight. But in my experience, when you're with undecided voters, and actually if we're honest with all of us, it's less about the words you say and the policies that you outline, and it is more about the trust in them. And the undecideds ask me on the doorstep a lot, how can I believe in you when I have been let down for so many years? And the first thing I say when I'm on the doors is I say, well, look, I've got a 1-year-old baby at home and I've got a full-time job, so I'm not volunteering lightly. I'm not volunteering for something that doesn't actually make a difference. But more deeply, I do point to Labour's record. The minimum wage, gay rights, the creation of the NHS, national parks, NATO, those things were not luck. Those came about because people voted Labour and the party kept its promises to those people. And to me also, it is about the values and traditions of a party that believes in something beyond the individual, about compassion and contribution and solidarity and service. A party that was born in the 1800s out of a coalition of unions and churches and cooperatives and mutuals that helped rebuild this country after World War II so that it served all people rather than a rich minority. A party that picked this country up again from the economic fallout of the 1980s and gave people faith in it again. And to be fair, if I was going on this long on the doorstep, I definitely would have lost a lot of people. But I do want to make one more point before I finish. Some people are suspicious of what is known as the centre ground. You're more likely to hear those concerns in political circles than on the doorstep, but you do hear them. People say you're pandering to the right, or you're colluding with the left, you're watering down your ambitions, you're making grubby compromises to get to power. But I don't see it that way. I think instead there is something really good and important about working to build a broad base of support across the country, across all geographies and classes and ages and races, or in my hometown, a set of policies that speaks to Croydon South as well as Croydon North, especially in a world that suffers from increasingly dangerous divides. So why vote Labour? For change, for decency, for competence, and for the common good. Many other people are voting Labour for the first time in Croydon South. I hope that you can put your faith in our party as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was Rowenna Davis. I now call on Peter Hitchens, do you make the case why we should vote
Against Labour, which is what I am calling for. I am not here to urge anyone to support, like, or even tolerate the Conservative Party. Indeed, if any of you feel like singing, I'll lead you in a chorus of a song I learnt in Glasgow in 1972, which hate the Tory party, clap your hands. Anybody wish to join in? I can do it. But it would waste some of my time. I don't wish to do so. We are actually in a contest in this country on July the 4th between a party everybody hates and a party about which nobody knows anything at all, which campaigns not on policies, which it reveals, but on wet, soppy slogans about compassion and about how, gosh, you're in trouble with your mortgage. We can solve that. But you know nothing. Absolutely nothing about this party at all. And I know a little bit because I've done some work on it, and I can tell you that from its own point of view, it's almost certainly going to be the most left-wing government this country has ever had. And it is led by a man whose past is so extraordinarily left-wing and so peculiar that when I tell people what it was and is, they won't believe me. But the reason why they don't tell you what they're going to do is because they know that if they told you what they were going to do, you wouldn't vote for them. Now, there's then the other question, which I have to take up with, which is the question of, if I hate the Tory party so much, why don't I wish to see it crash and burn on this occasion, having campaigned since 2003, as I have, for its destruction, having poured over its head so many gallons of slime and hatred? Why is it that I don't now want you all to rush off and vote for Nigel Farage's Reform UK? It's because I'm not a child. It's because I understand, as everybody in this country ought to understand, and millions of people currently don't, that a vote is not an emotional spasm, nor is it a sacrament. It's not even a civic duty. It's a measurable, simple act with a measurable result. If people vote for reform in large numbers, their votes will aid the victory of a Labour Party led by a man who is, as I say, the most left-wing person to put himself forward to enter Downing Street in the history of this country, who won't tell you what he's going to do. Very occasionally, it slips. The extraordinary moment when he said that he would not, even if one of his relatives was stuck in an NHS queue and waiting for treatment, he would not go private. He meant it. This is a hugely dogmatic person. This is someone who said, when eventually asked a serious question by an interviewer, actually said, yes, when I say working people, when he said that those are the people who he won't sting with heavy taxes, when I say working people, I mean people with no savings. That is to say, anybody with savings can absolutely be guaranteed to be stung by very heavy taxation by this Labour government. These are things we know. The other things we know are about the constitutional changes, which are set out by Gordon Brown and announced at a meeting with Gordon Brown and Keir Starmer in December 2022, which would effectively make it impossible for any future government, Reform, Tories, Lib Dems, anyone you care to name, impossible for them to reverse the changes which Labour proposed to make, which will be the completion, in my view, of the constitutional, economic, cultural, social and moral revolutions begun and unfinished by the Blair government between 1997 and 2010. Let me just warn you, in 1997, I had almost no platform. I had no access to anti-social media. I sat there and I looked, knowing what I knew from friends of mine who were Blairites and knowing what I knew about Anthony Charles Linton Blair, that a 1997 Labour victory would mean a transformation in this country for the worse, from which it would never fully recover. I could say and do nothing. Whatever I do now, what I know is this: I do not propose to wake up on the morning of July the 5th. If everybody else in the country is foolish enough to ignore what I say and put in power this disastrous Labour government, which everybody seems to be rushing to do, I cannot be accused of not having done every ounce of work that I could possibly do in trying to persuade people to avoid this disastrous national, political and social mistake. Thank you.
I now call on Professor Matt Goodwin to make the case for Reform UK.
Thank you. I'm a pollster, so just by a show of hands, how many of you not are going to vote for Reform, but would consider voting for Nigel Farage and Reform to send a message? Good to know. I am the child. I'm going to make the case for a wasted vote for something that isn't going to make a difference. I agree with 50% said. I think we are on the cusp of a very radical Labour government that is going to preside over the acceleration of mass immigration, the mainstreaming of woke ideology, a complete revision of our constitutional settlement, and the strengthening of a social democratic consensus in this country. I agree with all of that. But I am not going to fall into the trap of believing that the best response to that is to put my faith in a party which over the last 14 years has consistently sold this country down the river. That is not going to happen. Peter wants to wake up the morning after the election feeling as though he's done his bit in stopping the Labour tide. I want to wake up the morning after the election and feel as though I've done my bit in laying a foundation for a more credible, representative and responsive alternative to the Labour Party for the next 50 years. That's why I'm going to be voting for the Reform Party. If you want serious opposition to mass immigration, if you want serious opposition to illegal migration, if you want a response to the crisis at the borders, if you want the only manifesto that has actually outlined a meaningful response to woke ideology that is going to say, actually, we're not going to teach our kids to hate Britain. We're not going to teach our kids to be ashamed of our history. We're not going to teach our kids that a boy can become a girl and a girl can become a boy. We're not going to allow our government departments to be openly politicised and be biased against the things that make us and us, our collective memory, our history, our identity. Then you have to start to invest in something that is actually going to give you a meaningful alternative to what is the uniparty. Labour and the Conservatives are indistinguishable. Big state, big tax, big net zero, big immigration, big regulation, big woke, or at least woke adjacent, at least enabling everything that is opposed to who we are. And we're supposed to buy into this because it's slightly an alternative to Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. No, what we need is creative destruction. What we need is to kill the Tory party. If the Tory party, as the polls this morning suggest, falls to 50 seats, I will be celebrating. Because the Tory party does not deserve to exist in its current form. Here's one thing Boris Johnson did that you might not know. He removed the requirement for British companies to advertise jobs in Britain before they advertise them overseas. The Tory party does not care about this country. The Tory party cares about the Tory party. So why vote Reform? Simple reason. At this election, send Rishi Sunak and the Tories a big, loud message. We're not tolerating this anymore. We actually believe in Britain. Step 2, vote Reform in 2029. Vote for a party that will actually win 50 to 100 seats. Demand that Nigel Farage ups his game. Demand that he puts a coalition around him of serious people, experienced people. Demand that Reform become more than they are today, except, like me, Farage doesn't have the answers to Britain's problems. The Reform Party does not have the answers to Britain's problems, but they're asking the right questions. Do we want to continue with mass immigration? Do we want to allow radical Islam to embed itself in British society? Do we want to buy into net zero for the next 100 years? Do we want a London-centric economy? Do we want to prioritise financial services over everybody else? Do we want to teach our kids to hate who they are? Or do we want something else? If you want something else, the answer is clear. Labour's already won this election. It's over. It's over. It's finished. Go into the polling station next Wednesday, put your cross next to Reform, and send the system a message that you want to build something else.
Matt Goodwin, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Matt. And And now it's our very own Florence Reed.
Good evening, everybody. In 1869, John Stuart Mill considered the problem of marriage in of women. It is not attractive, allows only Hobbes that or not. Later in 1993, Homer Simpson took a tour of the Duff beer factory in the 16th episode of the fourth season of The Simpsons. On this tour, Homer discovers that his favourite beer, Duff, his second favourite beer, Duff Light, and his third favourite beer, Duff Dry, are all pumped from the same siphon. They are, in fact, the same beer. On the 4th of July, many people, me included, will experience a similar illusion of choice at the ballot box. They are faced with a uniparty, a phrase I borrowed from our own Mary Harrington. The soggy centre has formed an indistinguishable blob. In the red corner, slobbering enthusiasm for foreign intervention, gerontosexual obsession with pleasing boomers in Hertfordshire, chronic lack of creativity, a poverty of ideas, outsourcing everything but the physical body of the Prime Minister to unelected rackets of advisors, consultants, and arch corporate statist capitalists, the patina of corruption only thinly veiled by reassuringly thick hair, and in the blue corner, all of that, plus national service. So who could blame the British public for having apathy, especially the young, a category I still cling to like a limpet on the side of a shipwreck? Why, Starmer and Sunak might ask, would a third of young people in the UK rather swap our liberal democracy for military rule or a strongman leader? Because at least a tyrannical despot might have some joie de vivre. My argument for the Greens tonight is not out of a fondness for the party, I'm afraid.
15 seconds.
Nor its manifesto. I find this unholy alliance with Owen Jones quite disturbing. And still, this is why I'm considering voting for them. I've merrily voted for Labour all of my life, but not all Labour parties were born equal. In this job, I have a privilege of spending time with many people who do not share my politics. I've witnessed up close the so-called realignment happen in real time. But I'm afraid while we were busy realigning and talking about transvestites, something else was happening. Parents couldn't feed their children, rivers filled with chemicals, and people are dying waiting to see a doctor. The anti-woke left and the right just simply isn't up to the task. Yes, the manifesto pledges do sound like placards in a Ken Loach crowd scene. Ban bee-killing pesticides, shut factory farms, dismantle Trident. But I have to grit my teeth and bear it, because I actually want to represent something that remains of an old left in this country. That's an anti-war left, a left that respects the right to protest, a left that respects dignity of the common person. I increasingly sense that I am in a minority, perhaps in this room, when I say that anti-war activism in particular is something that I feel so strongly about. But it means a lot to me, and I know there are other people out there for whom it means too. I have a fondness for the Greens that I also have to share. Only in this country could you have a party in which effectively a group of Morris dancers in a village hall are discussing how to give nature a voice in Westminster. It sounds borderline deranged, but at least nature doesn't monitor its wife, making a mail-in ballot like Jeremy Hunt does. At least nature does not take its advice on gender from Tony Blair. At least nature doesn't drink mineral water out of a pint glass while trying to appear normal at the pub. Greenness is a part of ancient Englandness. It's something I aspire to. It's maypoles and mead and coming back
1 minute.
year after year after constantly losing elections again and again. It's eccentric and hopeful and spends far too much, and it loves badgers. It's probably naive. It is, after all, green. But wouldn't a touch of naivety be a treat after so much cynicism? Not just from the right, but from the left. A vote Green is a message to Keir Starmer, and it's also a message to each other. We are not machines yet. We have still more to do. I note that Peter's natural contrarianism, on this evening at least, is tempered by some pragmatism. Mine,
Time's up.
however, knows no bounds. I will not become the subjective woman. I say no to the tepid marriage offered by Labour, no to Duff beerification of British politics. I choose a one-night stand with the Green Party, and that night is the 4th of July. And if you want to join us, they've got very liberal sexual politics, I'm sure you'll all like.
Very good.
Thank you, Flo. Thank Thank you for that, and apologies for my non-masterful timekeeping. I managed to keep the thing going from the previous one. Last but not least, Rod Liddle to tell us why we should vote SDP.
So I'd like to object first that members of the audience have been seen eating conspicuously left-wing food while we've been actually trying to work out what to say to you guys tonight. I just think that's wrong. And also, to follow Matt, could I just take a quick poll of how many people are planning to vote SDP at the... Bloody hell. I'm going to tear this up. Respond to the other people who spoke and lied to you, as is their wont. The reason, Rowenna, that you're finding Labour voters in the leafy redoubts of Coulsdon and Caterham is because that's who your party supports these days. It doesn't support the working man in Middlesbrough or Barrow. The Labour Party even has councillors in the Cotswolds. And this is really what I wanted to address directly, which is that you're all going to the polls in a week's time, there or thereabouts. And the majority of us not with gladdened hearts because basically we're being coerced to choose between two parties, neither of which remotely represents us. We believe in the SDP that the has long outlived its usefulness. Millions and millions of voters feel disenfranchised, forced into voting for effectively the lesser of two evils, for parties which have ceased to represent the people and policies they were created to represent, and I mean Labour in particular. We're a communitarian party. When you look at the opinion polls and what people actually want to talk about, the things they care about, they seem to be economically reasonably radical. So, for example, we're in favour of nationalising the water companies. How can Labour not nationalise the water companies? We're in favour of raising taxes, and we will tell you that we're in favour of raising taxes rather than lying. And we're also in favour of reindustrialisation, of ensuring that people get a higher wage in the northeast of England, for example, where I come from. We've suffered a low-wage economy for so long, partly as a consequence of, on the other side of things, untrammelled immigration. So this is what, when I talk to people on the doorsteps and have done for the last 15 years and did do when I was canvassing for the Labour Party, they are economically quite radical and had no great objection to John McDonnell's economic policies back in 2019. But they are socially conservative. They believe a little bit like we do in faith, flag and family. They believe in virtue. We believe in rewarding people who do the right thing, those who work hard for a living and save money to provide for their children. We believe that married couples should pay no interest whatsoever up to £25,000 per year, a policy supported by, amongst others, the Financial Times and the Evening Standard. A revolutionary policy. Why not support marriage? We are aghast at the identity politics, at this hierarchy of victimhoods which Labour utterly buys into, but which, crucially, the Conservative Party has had 14 years to combat. It was under the Conservative Party that those appalling experiments were carried out upon children at the Tavistock Clinic in London. They did nothing to stop it. It's under the Conservatives that our universities have become ever more monocultural and left-wing. I think the figures are that back in the 1960s, 60% of university lecturers were kind of what we would call lefties. And today it's around about 95%. It's become a monoculture. And by the same token, we're conning our kids into going to these fetid institutions, charging them £40,000 a year for doing so, and telling them that they might get a good job when they emerge with a 2-2 in gender studies at the end of 3 years. It is a lie which has been perpetrated upon our youngest and most vulnerable people, and it has to stop. We are in favour of abolishing university tuition fees and cutting the number of people who go to universities down to 10% of the population, roughly, there and thereabouts. We believe that immigration is an evil which has been perpetrated on us largely for the benefit of large and also for the Treasury. But we also it's had on the cultural life of our country, and we are prepared to say so. So, when you look at your ballot paper next week, do bear in mind that we may not be very big. We may look rather pitiful, as I do today. But we are the people who actually represent the majority opinion in this country. If only they bloody well knew it.
Rod Liddle. Thank you, Rod. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go down the line once again. I'm going to ask one question, and we're going to give each speaker the chance to respond to whatever they have been interested in what the others have said.
Please don't ask me a question. I've got too much to say.
I'm going to have to ask you a question, I'm afraid, because the main message we got from a lot of those speakers, you might be used to being attacked from the left at some of these hustings. The opposite happened this evening, which is that everyone thinks Starmer is secretly extremely left-wing. Peter, in fact, said he's the most left-wing.
I don't.
Then you're misinformed.
What's your response? Is he?
So, actually, I think when you're being attacked for being a meaningless blob and the Duff beer of politics, and you're also being attacked for being a dangerous socialist conspiracy to bring revolution onto the country, on balance, on average, you're probably getting your politics about right. So I think
No,
that's
you
quite
might just
helpful.
be a meaningless blob that's also dangerous to the country.
Let's take the points that you actually raised, Peter. So on what is a woman? Keir Starmer has said repeatedly that a woman, he respects the biological definition of a woman and a woman's right to safe spaces.
I didn't mention that.
On taxes, the manifesto says... On
Hang on,
taxes,
he's
can I
changed
finish,
his mind
please?
3
Can I
times.
finish?
I'm totally lost as to how many penises he thinks women can have.
Do you know what?
Sorry.
Do you know, one of the things that I like about Keir Starmer is that he wants to bring back a sense of decency and sensitivity and respect to this debate, and I don't appreciate just making it into some kind of joke or the latest identity politics attack on this stage. So I personally find that approach refreshing. On the taxes, he said that there's going to be no increase in national insurance, on income tax or VAT. And the idea that because Keir Starmer would send his family members to the NHS when they needed help rather than going private is evidence of some kind of socialist revolutionary conspiracy, I think is absolutely insane. Keir has changed the party. Those aren't just words. He has changed the membership of the party, the rules, the policy, and he has said up front to every party member, the country comes first. That isn't just a pandering, that is a substantive set of changes. And to the idea that we could carry on voting for the Conservatives after this shambolic record is, quite frankly, insulting. You know, if we don't fire the Conservatives now, when will we fire them? And I'm afraid the price of criticism, Peter, is a viable alternative, and that's what we have in Labour.
Could I just ask, Rowenna, you said he's changed the party. Changed it to what? What is the best description for the new, changed Labour Party?
For me, I think it is a party that puts the country first. And that is in stark contrast to a political party that has consistently put their own personal or political careers in the standing line, and that's what matters. And I did just want to use a bit more of my time to come back on Matt's point about reform. This is very important to me, because when you place your votes,
1 minute.
you are not just sending a message. You are giving a set of people some power. And you are also sending a message, if you vote reform, to Putin. And the comments that Nigel Farage made, about the apologies that he was making for what is happening to the people in the Ukraine are completely out of step with the British people and really insulting and damaging to the people of Ukraine and indeed to our democracy. You also, if you vote reform, send a message to women. You might have seen some of the comments that were recently dragged up by the BBC about their candidates. It's not just one candidate, it was 8. One candidate said Mrs May was Merkel's bitch. Another one, Malcolm Cooper's behaving like a gutter slut. Several others referred to other women as thick tarts. You are sending a message that is real to women and to authoritarian dictators around the world if you vote reform, and you should take your vote more seriously than that.
I'm going to let Rod say something very brief, and then we're going to move on to Peter.
Is the Labour Party not also sending a message to women by its refusal to support Rosie Duffield when she has, for years, battled against the hatred in her party who follow this post-realist agenda towards transgenderism. Is that not also letting women down?
So, Keir Starmer is a respected friend of Rosie Duffield.
She doesn't think so.
She
doesn't think so.
They're colleagues. And Keir Starmer has repeatedly said that he respects the biological definition of sex and he respects women's safe spaces. What I think he is criticising, and it's fair to criticise, is the toxic nature of the debate. And I'm sorry for what Rosie Duffield has experienced in terms of the abuse she's got and the inability to be able to debate. But something has gone so wrong with the debate around these issues in this country. You know, you're talking about Brianna Gay, who lost her life last year. You're talking about people who can't speak about it anymore. What we need is a return to some decency and tolerance and respect and sensitivity around the debate. And too often, I feel like it's just being used to score points in a political debate room rather than to thoughtfully think through what might be best for people.
OK, all right, let's move on to Peter Hitchens.
All right, let's try it another way, if I could. We are on the brink of what will probably be one of the most significant changes of government in my lifetime, and I've been around since 1951. And I have seldom in my life seen an election campaign of such relentless trivia and irrelevance. Nothing of any importance is being discussed. When I raise the problems about Sir Keir Starmer, all right, people say doubt what I say. Now, for instance, Keir Starmer recently gave an interview, not a couple of years ago, to the New Statesman, in which he said that these were still very relevant ideas to him and he still supported them. So Keir Starmer, in his 20s, in his adult life, was an active comrade of a Pabloite group. You don't know what Pabloites are. I do. It's a particular brand of Trotskyism, something on which I'm rather qualified to speak, which has two major characteristics, which it sums up in the words red-green. There's a strong belief in moral, social and cultural and indeed sexual revolution, which is why Sir Keir Starmer has such trouble in divesting himself from his rather embarrassing views about penises, which I hesitate to mention, but they are here, so I think we have to mention. This is the reason why he has such difficulty, because he actually believes in the sexual revolution and its ideology, and he can't, in all honesty and in all sincerity, back away from it. And the other absolute characteristic of Pabloism is a very, very fanatical pursuit of green dogma and the net zero, which is rapidly already moving towards destroying this country's economy, and which a Labour government will follow. The other aspects of his past, of his secretaryship of a body.
Can I?
Okay, yes. You can do what. Yeah, go on. What?
I feel I need to. Why are you so unconvinced that he's changed? You're talking about him
because he says he hasn't. I just said he gave an interview to the New Statesman 2 years ago, and he was challenged on his Pabloite period, and they said, "Do you still believe in this?" Oh yes, he said, "I do." He doesn't make any bones of it.
I feel like it would strike a lot of viewers or listeners as a bit sort of opposite.
Okay, well then
attacked for being a sellout, a right winger.
Then let them.
That's what he's think he's a real.
Then let them. You're going to have 20 years to find out that I'm right and you're wrong, because this lot are not going to abandon power. The other point which I raised, which no one ever challenges me about, and which the representative of the Labour Party doesn't even mention in her rebuttal of me, is the constitutional proposals put forward by Gordon Brown and endorsed by Keir Starmer, which would actually ultimately destroy parliamentary sovereignty and make most of the actions of the coming government irreversible. Not to mention the fantastically cynical plan to give votes to 16-year-olds, a group from whom rights have recently been taken by, amongst other people, the Labour Party. They're not even allowed to marry anymore. They can't smoke, they can't drink, they can't buy fireworks, but Sir Keir Starmer proposes they should be able to vote. It is such a cynical action that you have to wonder whether the next thing along the line is something he used to believe in, but somehow or other in his weathercock arrangements has dropped for the moment, which is votes for EU citizens living in this country. If these things come true, along with the constitutional proposals, which nobody studies, then you will find that it matters. I spent a whole afternoon last week, I must finish this because it's quite important, reading the Labour manifesto. I have seldom seen such a concatenation of drivel and meaningless slogans. The one sentence in it which was coherent was, "We will make this country the best place in the world for football fans." It is that kind of document. It is a bikini. What it conceals is much more important than what it reveals.
Thank you, Peter.
So many points.
Matt, just to start you off here, Reform have not broken 20%. Fine, they may have done, but it's that seems to be the kind of ceiling. Is there not something true about the fact that Britain more widely is a kind of moderate country, and most people, even if you get 20% of people to the polls for Nigel Farage, are slightly put off by his style, his rhetoric, the obsessive focus on immigration above everything else? Won't we discover that this is a minority interest?
Well, 80% of seats in this country have majority support for lowering immigration. It's the third top issue for all voters. It's the number one issue for Conservative voters. So the idea that this is some kind of fringe issue is for the birds. Nigel Farage is not the solution. He is a train that will take you to a better destination. If you can surround Reform with better people, experienced people, a broader coalition, you have something meaningful. The answer to the Labour government and to what we're about to experience is some kind of reunification of the Conservative Party family, and by that I include Farage and all of the Reform voters, that can build something that better represents the country.
And why would you?
So first of all, I'm going to come back to your points, which were incredibly misguided and ignorant. Nigel Farage did not actually express any sympathy for Putin. If you read his comments closely, which is what I would expect from a Labour Party councillor, is what you realise is he said very carefully, he said, we need to discuss how the conflict in Ukraine ends. We need a realistic conversation about that in this country. I agree with Peter. This campaign has been atrocious. We haven't even discussed the war in Ukraine. We haven't discussed the conflict in Israel-Gaza. We haven't discussed the housing crisis. We haven't discussed how we reform the NHS. We haven't discussed the long-term growth strategy. It's been the worst campaign I can remember in my life. But Farage did not express sympathy for Putin. That's number one. Number two, what he has proposed is that we end this disastrous policy of managed decline, which the Conservatives put on steroids, which is otherwise known as mass immigration. It is neither racist nor xenophobic to say, why on earth are we hanging our entire economy on low-skill, low-wage migration that serves global corporates and liberals in London and makes them feel nice and morally righteous, but actually screws everybody else in the country over.
Yeah, but Matt, if you're against mass immigration, why are you urging people to vote in a way which will enable a Labour government? It's completely idiotic.
It's not idiotic. If you want to build a credible alternative to this broken model of established Tory patrician liberalism, then actually what you need to do is do exactly what Farage has said, which is accept this is a 5 to 6 year strategy for building an alternative. Look, just be a pragmatist for a minute. Assume the polls. Excuse me. I'd rather have Farage than Jeremy Corbyn. Okay, let's put it that way.
Corbyn's not standing. He's against us.
No, but I didn't hear Keir Starmer opposing Corbyn. In fact, actually, Keir Starmer told me to elect Corbyn on 2 occasions. And actually, Keir Starmer, the man of decency and integrity you describe, told everybody in this country to vote again on the Brexit question because he didn't trust ordinary people the first time around. So I don't buy this argument that Starmer is a Democrat. And the other thing, it's an important point. It's an important point. If you want to build an alternative to the Tories, you have to accept it's a 2-election strategy. It's a long-term strategy in the first-past-the-post system, and it's entirely possible. Canada in 1993 is the obvious example. Why on earth would you put faith in the Conservative Party after the last 14 years? The only person who's demonstrated that they can win votes in Labour seats, by the way, with the exception of Boris Johnson, who piggybacked on his accomplishments, is Nigel Farage.
So just to be clear, your long-term strategy, you accept Peter's argument then, that by voting Reform, you are going to make for more Labour seats, and you are going to help the future Labour government, and that's the short term, and that's your plan.
Next Wednesday, there is no alternative to a Labour government. That's happening. It's done. It's dusted. It's over. The only question then is, who becomes the opposition? Who becomes the opposition in this country? Nigel Farage, I'm not saying should be the opposition in this country, but I'm saying he's the springboard into building a serious opposition in this country.
OK, we are going to move on to Florence Reed. Thank you, Professor Matt Goodwin. Flo, loved your very witty and enjoyable disquisition on the Green Party, but it wasn't so much about the policies, I felt. Tell us which of the Green Party policies, is it the massive tax increases, is it the forced net zero, which bits are you most excited about?
Obviously, for the purposes of this evening, and in fact, perhaps in my greater life, I have become rather tired of the anti-woke movement. So much so, in fact, that I've become, you might have heard of the post-liberals as a movement. I've become the anti-woke. I am now so far through the circle that I've come out the other end. So I'm saying 3 cheers for self-ID, hip hip hooray for net zero, huzzah for rejoining the EU, you know, hands in for on-demand euthanasia for whoever wants it, deck the halls with degrowth. Let's just do it because chaos is the only option here. What you've got is a load of incredibly self-regarding, important politicians who feel that what they have to offer is something meaningful. And I get a sense from many of them that they don't recognise just how tired and angry so many people are, particularly young people. We spoke earlier today, actually, Freddie, about why I would choose the Greens over the Lib Dems, considering they have, on the face of it, quite similar platforms. I mean, that takes us back to the origins of this anger, which is 2010, when the promise was made to scrap university fees and then was reversed. And that put into a chain of events a situation, I think, that we're seeing now, in which young people just feel increasingly disenfranchised, disinterested in the political system, because they feel constantly lied to and betrayed. And cynical politicians are using them to try and leverage their own careers in the way that the Lib Dems did at that point. Universities have suffered because of that decision by the Lib Dems, so much so that I think we can blame a lot of the poverty of our national philosophy on the lack of interesting tuition, creative thinking, and great minds that previously would have inhabited the university sphere that were then taken out by petty bureaucrats in the back room of Imperial, King's and UCL, amongst many other universities in this country.
There's one other component I'd like you to just expand on, which is the Israel-Palestine component, because there was a little bit of that in your speech, but it feels like a lot of people who are choosing to vote Green or interested by Green are basically very interested in that conflict and don't find either of the main parties supporting what they perceive to be their side.
I mean, I don't know about how much of the Green Party is currently a kind of single issue voter. But for me, a lot of why I am seriously considering hovering over that box of Greens on the 4th of July is because there is only one party that is saying that we should stop the sale of arms to Israel. As someone who has spent my entire young life thinking about the anti-war movement, particularly the leftist anti-war movement, but now there feels to be more of a cross-political anti-war movement growing, I wonder exactly where those voters should find a home. Currently, the Green Party manifesto is the only one that seems to have a strong view on that issue.
Flo Reid, everyone, unless there's someone on the panel who wants to jump in on anything she said. OK, we have Rod.
But I voted Green because I thought they liked animals, rather than that they were a kind of slightly paradoxical kind of mash-up between Hamas and Stonewall, which is what I think they are at the moment. But that's...
Rod, we're going to let you carry on, actually, because
it's like the best band. That's
Hamas and Stonewall.
I guess the obvious first question to, and people on the panel can jump in a moment, to Rod has got to be, what's the point? If you happen to be in a constituency, one of the 120 or so that is fielding an SDP candidate, what's the point? It's so small, it's not going anywhere.
Because I believe in democracy. Yeah. Because I believe in democracy, and I think that at some point, democracy will have its way. And where I disagree with Matt, and the SDP and Reform do have a vague alliance, particularly we agree roughly on the same things on immigration and the post-logical virtue signalling identity politics. We agree about all that. But where I think there's a problem with Reform, and I say this sort of tentatively because there's a lot of supporters supporting my candidacy in Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland, and they're good people. Who are sickened particularly by 680,000 or 720,000 people coming in every year. I get that. There's no there's no bottom to reform. You know, Nigel Farage can open his mouth and talk about Ukraine, and I don't quite go along with your exoneration of him, because implicitly, in saying that actually the invasion of Ukraine had been precipitated by the EU's meddling in the Ukraine elections and by NATO's relentless expansion eastwards, which I don't agree with. This was basically countries which felt threatened by Russia joining NATO, so I don't agree with that. So I think there was an implicit kind of exculpation of Putin there, even if it wasn't, yeah, Putin's a good lad. But it does play into the transatlantic alt-right arguments about Putin, who they quite like, and the amount of money which is being given to Ukraine and the amount of time which we're considering.
So do you think Farage is superficial? Is that your?
No, I don't. I don't think he's superficial. I think he's captured by a North American political ideology. I think he's also an unrepentant Thatcherite. And so my objection, standing for the SDP in Middlesbrough, a town which has not recovered from Margaret Thatcher's policies in the 1970s and 80s, it simply doesn't fit. And when I say that the party has no bottom, I mean that it seems to be able to say, in a kind of Keir Starmer-ish fashion, oh, actually, we are in favour of reindustrialisation. We are in favour of investing in industry in these areas. But that doesn't... If you think Keir Starmer's manifesto, as Peter rightly pointed out, was gibberish, reforms came pretty close in being wishful thinking. All I say is there's no ideological basis for reform in the way that there is for the Labour Party, for the SDP, even for the Greens. Your ideological background, by the way, was the far right. The Greens sprung out of the far right at the beginning of the 20th century.
Well, I just want to make one very brief point. One very brief point. Reform is a very new party. I accept the point about having a stronger foundation. Let me give you one example. When your grandma or grandfather get old, they go in a social care home, right? Lots of owners of those social care homes then relocate to offshore trusts, and they stop paying tax in the UK. It's one of the most grotesque examples of crony capitalism. In the Reform Manifesto, they've said they will end that. That does not sound particularly Thatcherite to me. There are policies, obviously, that need work with any new party, but at the end of the day...
Do you not think Nigel is a Thatcherite? Oh, come on. He's told me countless times that he is.
I've also said tonight, I don't think Nigel is the final destination. I think Nigel is a vehicle to the final destination. Well, who knows?
Start in the room. If you have something to ask anyone on the panel, and I'm going to go straight for this lady because she's the nearest to me and I'm lazy. Well, if you say your name and what your question is and to who.
My name is Lisette Penston. My question's for Rowenna. Lisette, I noticed that you gave a very romantic picture of how the Labour Party was started. And I struggled with myself a little bit because I don't think the Labour Party in any way represents what you stand for. You also made this point about decency. I want to ask you about that because what evidence have we got that the Labour Party is decent? After all, Angela Rayner called Tories scum. J.K. Rowling has demanded an apology from Angela Rayner. Where is the evidence that your party is decent? I can't see it.
OK, Rowenna.
Oh, yes, I do. Sorry. So, Lisette, thank you. And I'm sorry that you feel that way. I think the biggest answer I can give you is that the Labour Party is trying to listen. You know, when we had those series of defeats, the Labour Party could have said, look, we're just going to carry on with this particular ideology and never change. But there was quite a lot of soul-searching and there was reflection. And if you look at sort of party management, like one of the biggest things that Keir says...
Does that mean it was a mistake? Sorry for interrupting, but does that mean that it was a mistake? Is that sort of a politician for that was a mistake?
Well, look, like, all I can say is that I think that the discourse should be respectful and inclusive and helpful, and I don't like it when anyone of any party resorts to name-calling. You know, it is a heated business and people get angry. But I do think the Labour Party has actually changed. When I'm on the doors and I'm talking to people, people get that. They get that it's not the same party that it was like 5 years ago. They understand that people have been banned from the party and can't ever come back. They know that the rules have been changed. They know that the policies have been changed. And there is this new alignment with what the people believe. Like, we're finally talking about the things that the people are talking about, the cost of living crisis and getting people's bills down, like the NHS and how we can get it back on track, how we grow our economy and build opportunity. We've stopped talking to ourselves, and we're genuinely trying to focus and look outwards.
I don't think you are. I think you're still talking to yourself about trans issues. I talk to lots of people. The issue never comes up except with the chatterati. Nobody talks about it.
Exactly.
I'm just going to repeat that in case people didn't hear. It is something that we've had on the online audience as well. So I feel we do need to really properly deal with this. This audience will be particularly interested in it. This whole question of the gender ideology and how Labour was apparently very timid and pliant and went along with what is perceived to be lobby groups on it and lost their contact with reality and haven't properly apologised for it. That's where some of the anger comes from. What do you say to those people?
I think I'd say that the Labour Party now, and Keir Starmer has said that he accepts biological sex and he accepts the right to safe spaces. And I think it can be hard for the
He
left.
accepts biological sex. And we just conceded that.
Sorry. And all I can say is that is the position of the Labour Party now, and they accept those safe spaces. And it is hard to talk about these things sensitively and with respect, especially if you're...
It isn't. It isn't at all.
All right, let's get another question. Someone maybe at the back? I'll pass you this mic.
Yes, hello. Paul Dinsdale. No one's really talked about the elephant in the room, which is that there's no money, as Liam Byrne once said. We've got to service a £400 billion COVID debt, which costs about £3 billion a year, I gather. The cost of housing and feeding illegal migrants is, whether they're genuine asylum seekers or not, is around £4 billion a year.
Yep.
We've got... sorry, I was trying to thought there.
Okay.
Yeah, so why... It's all right saying, sorry, on the non-dom point, that will raise a certain amount of money, but it's not going to raise enough to invest in public services and make everything hunky-dory and transform the country. So where's the extra money coming from? Could I just hear from the speakers on that?
I think that's particularly for Labour again, and I was going to say Conservative representative, but I don't suppose...
I've got some...
I don't suppose Peter will be...
As an anti-Labour representative, I can certainly explain where the money will come from.
Yeah.
Okay, let's give Peter a chance.
I don't want to let you off the hook, but I mean, I can save you the trouble.
Whenever you want.
What's your prediction for what does happen?
Some form of wealth tax aimed at people with savings. That's pretty much what Keir Starmer has told you in this fascinating interview with LBC, in which he was for once asked a political question. I would think it would almost certainly come in a weaponised council tax. Which will go for anybody who has any kind of property, because that's the way in which people who are not fantastically rich are able to gather assets and try and save some money to hand on to their children. There's an awful lot of money there, which a tax-greedy government can latch onto, and they haven't promised not to do it, which means that they will do it, but they won't say they'll do it, and Rowenna won't say that she'll do it.
Or revaluing.
Well, I don't know exactly how they'll do it, but it's just so obvious. And since you have, as your Chancellor of the Exchequer in Rachel Reeves, an admirer of the great economist Joan Robinson, who was herself an admirer of Mao Zedong and the North Korean state, all kinds of possibilities lie before you. But you won't believe me about this Labour Party.
Okay, Rowenna, what do you say to that? Peter is contesting there's going to be a massive tax hike on savings and things like council properties that you own. What do you say?
So I think there's a difference between the Labour Party that actually exists and the Labour Party that Peter imagines, and they're two quite distinct and different things. If Labour wins power, one of the biggest reasons it will be coming to power is because there's a cost of living crisis that needs to be dealt with, and that is hardwired into the party. There is no way they will have any instinct to raise taxes in those ways, and they've ruled out already national insurance, VAT, and income tax, precisely for that reason. And and Rachel Reeves has said, you can't write the budget for the next 5 years or 4 years in that manifesto. But the big taxes that affect working people will not be changed, and there are no plans to raise any others. In terms of the...
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, do you all know what no plans means?
In terms of the gentleman's question, which I think I do owe him an answer, the answer is growth. And that has been achieved by many other European countries and the United States, and has not been achieved by Britain. I don't think that's because we're less good as a country. I think that's because there hasn't been an actual plan for it, right? And under the Labour Party, you're going to get, first of all, some basic stability, which will help the markets an awful lot, but also a party that does actually believe in industrial strategy and does actually believe in partnering and working with business to... And I think that is a major difference between the two, and that will take time. Obviously, in the short term, there are things that we can change, but in the long term, that is the only answer to getting back to...
I'm going to take a question from the audience now, and this is actually directed at Peter Hitchens. What do you think of Nigel Farage's comments on Russia?
What do I think about them? Well, I would love to have a debate about the Russo-Ukrainian-American war.
We did it last time.
But we've had that. So I'm not going to. I think that what was illustrated in the response to what Nigel Farage was, as it were, compelled to repeat in a Panorama interview, he hadn't, I don't think, intended to bring it back into the campaign. I think what it revealed was the almost total inability of our political class to have a serious argument about foreign policy. It was all couched in abuse and you're a traitor, you're a Putin this, you're a Putin that. The idea that anybody might have any opinions on this which were not paid for or pushed onto him by a foreign power, the idea that people might differ on foreign policy in this country was completely negated. And since this country has made very many foreign policy mistakes, including the most significant of all, Suez, in which the great Nye Bevan stood out against the policy of the government and boldly publicly did so, and was not called an apologist for Gamal Abdel Nasser for doing so. I think people should remember that foreign policy debate is vital. So I think the main thing it reveals is we can't in this country anymore have intelligent foreign policy debates, and I advise anybody thinking of having one to go home, because you won't get anywhere.
Had a few here. Has anyone in the room got a question for either Flo or Rod? I just want to bring it. There's a gentleman over there.
How often can we vote for you, would be my suggestion.
Well, thank you. Hi, Rod. I'm an SDP member, so good luck to you. Do the small parties need electoral reform to succeed, or is the path just to battle through the first past the post hurdle somehow over a term or two to succeed that way?
We need electoral reform, and it's caused us so many problems. I mean, this country woke up to a shock in 2016 when we voted to leave the European Union, and it may not have been a shock had it not been for the fact that 87% of our parliamentarians were Remainers. So it came, this huge tranche of opinion, the majority tranche of opinion, if you believe the vote, was totally unrepresented in Westminster. The Hamas Stonewall Coalition has also in Westminster for the past 20 to 30 years.
Thank you, Rod.
No worries. That was
solidarity.
If you look at the voting, and I think Matt will correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think at the last election, the Green Party got something like 3.7% of the vote nationally, and got one MP. The Scottish Nationalists, led by wee Cranky, got 3.9% of the vote and 48 MPs. And this whole thing, we were talking a little bit earlier, as the point Lisette brought up about no one really cares about this ludicrous transgender stuff. They don't. But we've had a parliament which for the past 15, 20 years will go along with everything that the radical activists say on every possible identitarian issue, whether it be transgenderism, or whether it be Sir Keir Starmer looking like an utter dick as he takes a knee with Angela Rayner in favour of an odious American political group which no one ever mentions anymore because we know what they're like. And I just think, you know, without electoral reform, our voices simply don't cut through.
Okay, does anyone actually disagree? Peter, are you also in favour of proportional representation?
No, it's a hideous idea. Failing parties always grope for it because it means that some of their leaders might get parliamentary seats. But it would hugely limit the possibility of change. The proportional representation would mean even if Rod Liddle's party or some of the other tooth fairy parties to my right could get seats, they would never get enough seats to form a majority government. They would never they would never be able to form a coalition before an election which could clearly state what it was they were going to do. First past the post forces the formation of pre-election coalitions, tells the public what it is they're going to get or what they're not going to get, and enables the voters to throw out a government they don't like. Proportional representation prevents all those things, and it freezes political parties forever in small bundles which can never actually achieve anything. And people go on about Geert Wilders gets this great triumph. He didn't. He can't govern, nor can any of the other this great supposed right-wing sweeping of Europe a couple of weeks ago. Look at what actually happened. None of these parties has anything remotely resembling a majority or any ability to control matters. They have to form coalitions. Many of those coalitions take, in Belgium, often up to a year to form. Even in efficient Germany, something like 3 or 4 months, during which there is no government, which actually might be the one good result of PR.
Okay, so that's a thumbs down for PR from Hitchens. I've got a question from a member of the online audience for Matt. Reform's support will be as much from voters who care about culture as economic issues. How would you allay fears that reform will just devolve into neo-Thatcherite libertarianism once in power?
Well, the first thing to say is on the culture point. We had some discussion earlier on about gender ideology, what we're teaching kids. The only political party at the election next week that's actually promising to root out gender ideology from schools and actually teach kids about the positives, not only the negatives in our history, is the Reform Party.
And again, excuse me.
And the SDP. But again, I mean, if you are a pragmatist, and I am very fond of the SDP, but if you are a ruthless pragmatist, the simple reality is, for better or worse, Nigel Farage is the only alternative to the two big parties, okay? In terms of brand recognition, in terms of household name, in terms of celebrity, and in terms of political instinct.
But not in terms of members of parliament?
Not yet. In terms
not
of
ever?
Members, not yet in terms of members of parliament. So if you want actually your kids to go to school and not be indoctrinated, if you want the universities to be reformed, free speech, free expression, all the things the Tories haven't done for 14 years and all the things that Labour are going to mainstream over the next 5 years, 10 years, who knows,
okay.
Then vote reform. But on the economics, this idea that actually reform are Thatcherites in disguise is for the birds. Farage himself obviously has a political history. Look at all I'd say is go home tonight.
Rod he was a Thatcherite.
Yeah, but
must be true.
It would be like judging the Labour Party based on what, I don't know, Angela Rayner or Sam Tarry says, right?
She's the leader.
It's a broad coalition. It's a broad coalition. Go home tonight, download Contract for You,
well,
and have a read.
Richard Tice is a...
That's it. They're two people in one party. Go home tonight, look for yourself. Contract for You.
Sorry, can I just say...
You will. Let me just get a question in. I'm going to make sure you get a chance to come back on that. In fact, why don't you talk while I'm walking slowly? Talk briefly.
Let's be clear. I would advise everyone, not that I'm in a position to advise anyone given the nature of my own self, but I would advise everyone who votes next week to vote Reform if there's no SDP candidate in your constituency. I would vote Reform if there were no SDP candidate. But I still worry. I don't believe it is a broad church. I think it's basically a Thatcherite rump. But with that in mind, on the culture issues and on immigration, they're undoubtedly in step with the majority of the public.
You say your name and who you're directing the question to.
Andy to Rowenna. One of the things that's crippling industry whether you're trying to run a steelworks in Port Talbot or trying to run a pub or even just trying to run a school or a hospital, is crippling energy prices. INEOS have just decided that the last oil refinery in Scotland is going to be converted to import LGD from America. And he's taking all his money, which he was going to invest in Lancashire, Wales, Yorkshire, the North East and under the North Sea for the biggest shale gas reserves we've got in Europe. He's now going to get all that out of Texas, liquefy it, bring it into Grangemouth and sell it back to us at 3 times the price. You talk about GB Energy, and it's all about solar panels and wind farms, which are 2 or 3 times more expensive than producing electricity using gas. So your plans are going to absolutely cripple what is already a horrendous situation.
Okay. I think that was a question. Let's add a rhetorical question mark at the end of it. Rowenna.
It's an important question, so thank you for it. The big energy crisis, what the people talk to me about on the streets when you go out day after day canvassing, is what happened to those energy bills when Russia invaded Ukraine. And that left us vulnerable to an incredibly huge spike in prices. We were vulnerable to a dictator, and we shouldn't have been. And we have to deal with that. At the same time, we do have to deal with a climate emergency. You know, that's really important. And you know, that's a fact that's recognised by the vast majority of voters, and they want to see us have an action on that. And Labour Party says, unlike what we heard earlier from the Conservatives, that the green transition is a risk for the economy, one of Labour's missions is to make us a clean energy superpower in the world. And those fuels that you're talking about, they will eventually end. And at the end of that, someone is going to be buying or selling renewable energy. And I think it's better that we're the ones selling it rather than the ones that are buying it. And I'm really proud of the Great British Energy story, because what it does is it says, look, we've got some energy independence. We've got a way to get down our bills and having another company in the mix that can supply your energy. And we are helping in that process the green transition and becoming a leader in that. And I do see it as an opportunity.
Okay.
Where I differ from the Greens is that we actually have to do this with people, and it can't be, we can't transition on the backs of the poor. We actually have to do this in a respectful and engaging way that benefits people and provides jobs and employment and cheap energy to people in the process.
I feel like this is another huge issue. We've touched on the gender one. This whole net zero question is something that troubles a lot of voters. Does anyone want to jump in on that?
I do.
No? Okay.
Yeah. We need a series of micro nuclear power stations built around this. That is the way. And bizarrely, of course, the Green Party opposes nuclear energy, the greenest form of energy, and that's the first step. But we also need to use the reserves of oil which we have at the moment, and to take the people with us, because frankly, other than that, all we're doing is exporting our emissions to third world countries, which makes no sense whatsoever.
Flo, why does your party oppose nuclear?
Well, for the very, I would say slightly illogical reason that there is there is a sense that in some way nuclear is not clean. I think Germany is a good example of why shutting nuclear is obviously a disastrous thing to do. There are many disastrous things that I'm sure the Greens would do should they come to power. The good news is they're not going to come to power. So I don't have to worry about that. What I have to worry about is a government that is actually controlled in many cases by the interests of big oil companies and various other interest groups that do not reflect the values of people who work on oil rigs. They do not reflect the integrity of our relationship with nature that we have in this country, that I think is specific to this country, our idea of husbandry that does exist here, that the Greens do reflect.
Okay.
There are many reasons why the Greens are disastrous in one way and so very amazing.
Very attractive in another. Peter Hitchens?
Yes, the green zealotry, to which Sir Keir Starmer is entirely personally wedded, will do many, many things to destroy the economy of this country. The idea that a country devoted to net zero is going to be able to mount a major economic recovery is an absurdity. It is actual self-harm damage, which also on its own terms is ludicrous. We shut down and indeed blow up coal-fired power stations in this country at the time when China is building perhaps 20 or 30 of them a year. I think probably more. I don't have the figures. The point about this is that if you the action is entirely symbolic. The amount of emissions, if you believe the theory of man-made global warming, the amount of emissions which are removed from the sky by Britain blowing up its coal-fired power stations are totally cancelled out by what China and India do. It's a wholly utopian, wholly impractical and brutally economically damaging policy to which this Labour government will be entirely committed, the one which the three tooth fairy parties on my right and the one of the shifty and unopen about its aims Blairite formation on my left will not tell you. But this is what is going to happen, and this is what you propose not to stop by not voting against the only party which can prevent the election of a Labour government. Now, people can say, oh, it's all over, it's all over. I've read that, I must say this, it's all over, I've seen the polls. What are you? Are you human beings with a will and a mind, or are you some kind of ovine flock who look around first to see what you think other people are doing before you decide to vote? Very few votes, and then postal, have yet been cast. Every single person in this room, every person watching this on the internet, still has the opportunity not to make this fatal mistake of electing this disastrous Labour government. There is only one way to stop it, and to learn to vote against, to stop saying, oh, I want to punish the Conservative Party.
But that's
illogical, Peter. You won't punish the Conservative Party. They will go off and spend more time with their money. They will not be punished at all. Saying you don't like the Conservatives and therefore you're going to elect a Labour government is like saying, well, I try to keep out of sex in this discussion, but let's say you have a masochist partner, you get tired of all that leather and all those chains, so you chuck them out and you bring in a sadist. It's a completely moronic and illogical action. Not a sensible thing to do.
That is illogical. That is illogical. If we're
How
not
would
an
you know
ovine
if it's
bloc,
illogical?
If we're not an ovine bloc, then we could go out and vote Reform or SDP or Green.
What we're going to do,
and get Labour in. Yeah.
In a minute. What we're going to do is we're going to take three very brief sub-20-second questions. One here, one there, and one over there. And then everyone is going to get a chance to sum up beautifully and also respond to whichever of the questions you want in sequence. Let's start with this lady here.
Hi, I've got 3 teenage sons. George Galloway says that if Keir Starmer becomes Prime Minister, we are going to be at war within 6 months. So how worried should I be?
Good question. There's a chap over here.
Oh, hello. This is a question for Rowenna. Just two questions, actually. First of all, just one. Oh, God. Okay, so on mass immigration, I agree with Matthew that this is a huge issue. What exactly is Labour, in detail, not broad, vague statements, what exactly is Labour's policy around mass immigration?
We'll find out here.
Will. Question for Matt. So you said Nigel is the train, not the destination. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Reform is a company in which Nigel controls most of the shares. So my question is, do you think Reform's unusual structure is a good thing or a bad thing?
Okay, great. What we're going to do, there was, I think, a question to 3 different audience members there. We're going to go down the row, and you can both answer those questions, but also give us a final rhetorical flourish, if you will, as to why we should vote for your party. I'm going to start with you, Rod. You've actually got a microphone.
I think your sons should be worried. I think we are in a dangerous situation. And unlike Nigel, I don't think that dangerous situation has been primarily caused by the West and NATO. I think there are agents out there in Iran, actors, agents in Iran, in North Korea, in Russia, and to a degree in Turkey, who are lining up. And I think I think there is the whiff of 1935 about it. And I think we do have to be very, very worried. And I think the way to address that worry is you never appease dictators. You stand up to them. And if that puts me at odds with reform over what we should be doing, then I can live with that a little bit. The second question was about why Labour's shit, isn't it? I forgot.
I think let's get a summing up thought. Thought from you.
Sorry, I'm trying to remember what the second question was.
Mass immigration.
Oh, mass immigration, I think it's not the third biggest issue. I think in the public mind, it's certainly 2 or 3. I think in terms of our economy and what it's doing to our country, it is the most important issue. And that's why, as a member of the SDP, obviously I'd urge you to vote for the Social Democratic Party, but if not, vote Reform, because they are the only party which has the remotest intention of doing anything about immigration. The Conservatives have had 14 years and it's got worse and worse and worse. And if you believe Labour is going to suddenly take a hard line on immigration, then you must be living in the sort of land which Mr. Hitchens over there would describe as ovine. It simply will not happen. Immigration is absolutely crucial, crucial to our culture as well as to our economy and to low wages.
OK. Thank you. Hello.
She looked at me with hatred.
Not hatred.
It was.
Not hatred. That's my look of love. I think you're right to worry about war, and I think that many people do, and I think there is only one party that has an explicit anti-war manifesto, and I hate to say it, but it is the Green Party, for all of their many, many, many failings. That is something that they are alone in offering in this election. That is why I will vote for them. That is something that means more to me than the potential of being euthanized by a Morris dancer, you know? So for me, that matters, and it matters a lot, and it matters to young people, because if there is some sort of national service or anything of that type, to be in the hands of a warmongering regime feels like a very scary place to be. So that is why I feel so strongly about it. If Europe is anything to go by, then it's clear that business as usual is only going to end in one thing, and that's a right-wing populist backlash. And the philosophical vacuum that has been left in this country is quite obviously going to be filled by figures like Nigel Farage. And so for me, the only answer is to offer a left-wing alternative that has some sort of conviction. And unfortunately, for all its sins, the only place I have found conviction in this election is with the dreaded Greens. So pity me, but more pity the left in this country. And I hope that we can go up from here.
OK, thank you, Flo. Mike Goodwin.
Yeah, I think we're approaching a civilizational moment in this country and in the West. I think the things that make us and us, our collective history, our memory, our identity, our ways of life, the things that define who we are being eroded, are being deconstructed. I think we can all sense that. I think we can all see that, whether it's through mass migration, whether it's through woke ideology, whether it's through an incompetent political elite. I think about the country that my students are going to grow up in. I think about the country that my daughter is going to grow up in, and I don't like it one bit. And I think it's fine to say, let's maintain faith in the Tory party for people who, to be frank, might not have to actually live with the consequences of the Conservatives being maintained as a political force. But I think for many people who are going to have to live through a period of Labour dominance, a period of Tory renewal, or keeping this ridiculous party on life support, I think those people demand something more. Nigel Farage doesn't have all of the answers to our country's problems. But what we need is some creative destruction, and we need to accelerate and put the pedal down to get us to a better place where actually some people can come up with some alternatives to this broken status quo. That's why I'm voting Reform on Wednesday.
OK, thank you, Matt. Peter Hitchens, tell us your concluding thoughts. Answer any questions that you found interesting.
Sorry about the questions. No, this is just a plea, and it genuinely is a plea for adult rationality rather than emotional spasm. For people to behave like grown-ups, to act as if they know a little bit about the world, have observed it and understand its workings, rather than as if they believe in the tooth fairy. There will be no, we've had the representative Reform UK here has said it, there will be no Reform government. There will probably be only one Reform UK MP, maybe two, as a result of this election, even if they score millions of votes. There will be no SDP government. There will be no Green government. There is very likely to be a Labour government capable of doing enormous and grotesque damage to this country. Those of you who remember the amount of constitutional, economic, social and moral damage which the Blair government did should recognise this is Blair Mark II, and it's coming your way, and it will be worse. And you should not, as I say, be influenced by people who try. The opinion polls are not a device for measuring public opinion. They're a device for influencing it. And what you should not be is a sort of weak-minded person who is influenced by what other people say they're going to do. You should decide what you're going to do on the basis of reason. Now, unless you want the sort of Labour government which won't even tell you what it's going to do, and which contains in its proposals, constitutional proposals, so shocking that they scare the pants off anybody who reads them, which is hardly anybody, but I'm telling you, they're there. You can read them. If you want that, then that's okay. I don't mind. But if you don't want it, there is only one thing you can do, which is to vote against Labour, and there's only one way of voting against Labour. You cannot punish the Tory party by not voting for them. As I say, they will go away and spend more time with their money. You will punish yourselves by living under a government which taxes and oppresses and regulates and orders you what to think and what not to think in ways currently unprecedented, which you will hate. And if you believe this, oh, well, in 2029 we'll have another chance, again, look at the enormous, blatant cynicism. One thing which they have revealed beyond doubt, votes at 16. This is not the act of somebody who's thinking carefully about policy. This is the act of somebody of boundless, profound cynicism about politics, the kind of boundless, profound cynicism which goes with deeply dogmatic, ideological, ends justify the means government, which you should fear. You've been given enough signs and enough warnings. If you go out and vote for these ridiculous non-parties and fail to prevent a Labour government, you will have only yourselves to blame. And it will be a long, long period of blame, and there will not be a surcease of it in 2029 or for many years after. They're not leaving once they get in.
Peter, Rowenna, you have a minute and a half.
I'm really sorry that your children are worried about war.
They're not worried.
Well, I'm not worried either.
She's empathising with you. It's all right.
I'm asking if I should be worried.
No, you shouldn't be, because Keir Starmer's going to focus on peace, not war. In the Middle East, the policy there is for an immediate ceasefire, and anyone who remembers Blair and Clinton knows that in that part of the world, there has been a constructive Labour record of trying to establish peace in that area. The other area in which is really important in Labour policy is Ukraine, where we continue to offer financial support against a dictator which Reform's leader has currently apologised for. In terms of mass immigration, the Labour Party doesn't believe that immigration is a problem. It believes that unmanaged immigration is a problem. And under the Conservatives, it's gone up 3 times. And we've got a really proud record in this country of giving sanctuary and safe and legal routes, for example, to people from Afghanistan and people, you know, from around the world.
700,000 a year.
We should be proud of that, right? And we should also be proud, especially when the Windrush anniversary was celebrated on Saturday, of the people who make contributions to this country. That said, we do have a challenge with the boats. And Labour has said, and Keir Starmer is a prosecutor, he's quite good at going after criminals, that he wants to prioritise tackling those gangs. And also, if you're looking about, and this is something I have some sympathy with Rod on, the idea that our economy has become quite addicted to very low-wage labour to hold up a lot of services. And the Labour Party has actually got a history and a tradition of fighting for workers' rights and trying to improve wages and conditions. And I think if you get that right, that may be a way of bringing down some of that immigration that we've become in some ways addicted to, and would be more respectful for all. So I have to come back to this idea about that Labour is dangerous. If you read the Labour manifesto, and I have read all 136 pages, the only constitutional changes are to give votes to 16 and 17-year-olds. Anyone who looks at the polls knows that they're just as likely to break right as they are left. Indeed, in France, if you look at where they're going now, it's often to the far right. And in terms of constitutional reform of the Lords, it's simply asking the Lords to require at 80 years old. It's hardly a revolution. And so I think, again, that there's a difference between actually exists, which is about common decency and the common good, and this weird spectre that is being painted before you that I simply don't recognise and isn't there for you in black and white. Okay. And my final sentence would be that, you know, rebuilding trust takes time. And just like Keir Starmer has said, it's going to take probably 10 years to rebuild our economy. It probably will take 10 years to rebuild that trust. And I do think that Labour has the morality, the policy, and the competence to do a better job. But look, I'm very happy to come back in 2 years' time and be held accountable for that.
Great, let's make that a day. Ladies and gentlemen, may I just say, if you've been watching online as well, when we started the UnHerd Club, this kind of thing is exactly what we had in mind. People who have different points of view coming and having a civilized conversation and actually talking it out. So thank you for your forbearance for people you may not have agreed with so much. And please say well done to all of them, because I thought they did a tremendous job. Thank you. If you're watching online, we'll see you next time. Otherwise, the bar is open.